information might also be found in the official program of the conference.
Ah, yes, sure.
Since we both gave a presentation, but well.
Well, this is too. I'm sorry.
And it's also quite interesting that, well, after 1990, those geographical disciplines, thank you. So those parts of geography which were quite popular before the communist term, but were then later on, such as ethnic geography and political geography, and so had a revival. And well, quite obviously, those who try to re-establish these fields went back to the theoretical traditions of the interwar period and tried to modernize it. But in a really interesting way, none of them went back to related Soviet works. Because in the communist period, well, it didn't matter whether Soviets were doing something similar, still it was banned in Hungary, because it was important to have a good relation with our socialist neighbor countries, and for this reason it was a political idea that these disciplines should not be cultivated at all. And later on, after the communist term, those who re-established the discipline, well, they found their theoretical and sometimes also ideological roots in some interwar geographers' works. And for this reason, well, due to their quite strong anti-communist attitude, they didn't want to refer to Soviet authors, although, well, living in the Soviet Union and working there and being a communist are completely categories and much more difficult. But anyhow, these works well, didn't really find their way to geography, which is now again blossoming.
Yeah, but another thing is that ethnic geography is not anthropology geography. Yeah.
Sure. So these are two different things.
And I was interested in what was the influence. Was it Russell for
in interwar geography?
Yeah, in interwar.
No, actually it was not. So.
Sorry, I couldn't attend.
You didn't miss anything.
No, but I actually correct some very urgent emails since I postponed my refund for a while. So you're not satisfied with how it was, or just kind of like the same?
No, he had a great presentation. So.
That's great. You don't care about, as long as you have a good presentation, you don't care about the other people in the panel, you don't care about how many people are in the audience, you don't care about anything. You care about your presentation.
The presentation was very primitive, you know, the PowerPoint.
I don't think that it can be more primitive than my presentation. You know, you had a kind of like sophisticated presentation, but
yes, ours we already know the very basic. Yeah,
well, content is more important, I think. So.
Yeah, and as long as you manage to get across the main ideas, you know, that's the important part. Because I recently attended this presentation of very sophisticated PowerPoint presentation, but it was very scientific at the same time. That person got trashed. and I think that she spent, I think, a day just working on the technical parts of the presentation. It was so elaborate that I had never seen something like that. But, you know, the ideas behind it were not that consistent or substantial.
Also works if you don't have any slides, it is better to speak slower or give more examples or something to make it easier for the audience to follow what you're expecting.
Sure.
You're right, sometimes there are some missing in the presentation, there's nothing in the slide.
Yeah. I would just like,
I never.
we were highbrow conversation about anthropo geography. Russell was criticized in the 30s, in the 30s.
Here it is. No, it's perfect. Really, you can also send to the
geographical sequence on ethnography, how it emerged and re-emerged. Russell was very important for the earliest period, like the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century. Ethographers from the Russian Museum corresponded with him, they translated him, and he was big.
He had quite a name actually, quite as a package from the US to Russia. Anyhow, interwar geography, well, Russell Ratzel was basically not the most liked person, if you want, for a very simple reason. So in interwork human geography in Hungary, the key concept was the French approach of geography. So the translation is again human geography, but there are different approaches to understand it. So anthropogeography, that's also human geography or something like it, but these strands were absolutely different because Ratzel's idea was that of environmental determinism. And climate is there, and landscape is there, and
that's why people
absolutely. So this sort of argumentation was fully adopted in British geography, US geography, and in many other countries in Europe. And as a reaction, this geography emerged in France in the early 20th century as a reaction, because their problem was actually with this environmental determinism. So their point of view was that these relations are going in both directions. So there is some environmental influence in human society, but human society also has a certain agency, if you want. They didn't use this term at that time, but that was about finding a place for human agency. That was what I referred to yesterday as human with spirit. So that was the term which was used by the geographers. And interwork Hungarian geography, which was not homogeneous, of course, but this was the leading approach for at least two reasons. One reason was that Telekin, as such, personally, he also rejected geographical determinism because his point was also, he was a neurological person, and for many other reasons, he thought that agency must be there. The human being is not only a biological machine, but can make decisions and responsibilities. So there was a personal side why he did this. And there was also a political interest in the background because Hungarian geographers fought after the First World War and after the peace negotiations that it is basically the French delegation that should be convinced about our truth. If a second peace negotiation comes later. So their idea was that the best way to convince French geographers and the French delegation is to use their own approach. To adopt the French approach of geography humaine in order to explain why those geographers in Hungary can be justified on the basis of this approach. So both political interest and personal conviction. So Hungary lost roughly 2/3 of its territory after the First World War. And the main point was to get it back. So territorial recognition is set. So revising the new boundaries established after the negotiations. So for this reason, the geography humaine was in the center of Hungarian geography, which was absolutely not a deterministic approach. That is why I mentioned just briefly yesterday that while criticizing interwork geography as being deterministic, it was not. So it can be criticized for many reasons, not for this. But it was a very interesting strategy of new Marxist-Leninist geographers that, of course, they copied the Soviet model. They strongly opposed those geographical deterministic views for obvious reasons. But they didn't have, to be honest, they didn't have any argument against these to geography humaine and to some other approaches which were not deterministic, but they were bourgeois. So what they actually did was that they lumped everything together. And they said that, this sort of geographical possibilism, as it was called. Nature provides some possibilities, but it depends on you how you use them or not. So the brief explanation was always that, it just made some minor corrections on geographical determinism, and it was not something absolutely novel. Although in my interpretation it was not only my personal interpretation, but that was basically a main matter of debate in the interwar period at the international level, whether the environmentalist point of view or the possibilist point of view is better. So there were large clashes with the international academia media around. No. But that was for another reason. So the concept was that the goal of territorial division was the main motivation for Hungary's political steps. And that was the main reason why Hungary basically was determined to enter the war on the side of the Axis. And the point was that, well, the whole question should be and all those entities which are stronger against this issue, which put this question in the forefront, which make the question itself visible, should be banned, because otherwise this will reproduce itself, even if it is not expected or not planned. So simply speaking about the question will reproduce the question and the discourse. That was basically fear.
You see, in the Soviet case, it was pushed by the diplomats, by the military. This was very useful because now refers when there's an expert. For example, the problem of Trieste. Italy and Slovenia, and in 46 two congressmen went to a conference to kind of deal with this, territorial divide. And there is much more to be learned about it because archives, military, foreign affairs, archives, probably this work really affected the post-war geography, political geography. Yeah, but I don't know how to prove it yet. We need to do
Yeah, it's really interesting because, well, as far as I know, geopolitics as such was banned in the Soviet Union too. I mean, it's a scientific discipline. Of course, in practice they do geopolitics, everybody does. But it is really strange. So in Hungary, in this sense, the formula was quite simple: no ethnic geography, no political geography, no geopolitics. No rather than no.
silence and no politics. Okay.
So really, maybe I will have some questions which I can send you. Really, so I'm interested in the topic. So
yes, probably we could think about something, some collaboration.
That would be very nice.
So,
Okay, thank you for your presentation.
Nu lekker maar stil. Dat gaat wordt aan de context. Hoe? Die blokkade. Die blokkade. Daar jongen. Kom.
Așa. Ceea ce mă interesează, acum ne-am eventual să ținem legătura și vă trimit cu eu fiecare lucru despre ce mai ținem de site-ul nostru al Sociologiei. Încă suntem pierduți în internet, dar încet o să ajungem.
Okay, so let's gather our strengths and continue, because otherwise you are risking your lunch. So let's continue with Jan Levchenko from the previous half of the panel, so still we continue the Russian discussion, and he's also represented for sake of variety the Higher School of Economics from Moscow, and floor is yours.
Yes, thanks a lot for an opportunity to take part in this conference, an invitation here, and yes, my speech is dealt with some questions of evolution of Churchill Moscow Churchill Semiotic School. And first of all, I'd like to give my apologies for this awful word in my title, prerequisites, because it should be a normal word background, but it was, you know, a kind of foolish Heideggerian temptation to use a word that could be divided into some parts with some hints that it has very deep semantics, but I think that it could be re-entitled as normal backgrounds of Churchill School or something like that. During the second half of the 20th century, the official academia, especially in the humanities, symbolically abandoned Marxism in favor of dogmatic opportunism and constructed a system of service rather than research. There was no longer ideology except subordination in the humanities. I mean, only humanities in the Soviet Union and primary literary studies. The leading school of the Soviet humanities were shifted to the margins of the main field. Mikhail Bakhtin and some of his followers, Mikhail Bakhtin, after he spent much time in Gulag, and some of his followers have found a lodgment in provincial institutions, not only Saransk, but the shelter for Bakhtin himself, but also Voronezh, Kemerovo, Donetsk, a bit later, and others. As for the comparative study of languages and literatures, I mean primarily Leningrad philology of the 30s and 40s, this paradigm was cruelly dissipated after the notorious campaign against cosmopolitanism, so-called cosmopolitanism, anti-Semitic campaign of the late Stalinist age. To the contrary, the most of the Soviet supporters of structuralism and early structuralism and semiotics and linguistics were Muscovites, or had moved there to get prestigious Moscow diplomas and jobs in the leading research institutions of the capital. So they could easily communicate and interchange their ideas in Moscow, and applied mathematical, at last structural linguistics was located in the capital. It should be kept in mind that It should be kept in mind that structuralism, that linguistic structuralism had one privilege in the Soviet Union. Born in the late 40s, first in the USSR, first in the USA, then in the USSR, computer engineering was approved shortly before Stalin's death. While Zilu's Soviet officers of science stigmatized cybernetics as a lженаука, false science, computer engineering was interpreted as a section of applied mathematics and actively developed since 1948, when the Institute of Fine Mechanics and Computer Engineering within the Soviet Academy of Science was established under the guidance of Stalin personally and military ministry. After the rehabilitation of cybernetics in 1955, when the famous and very significant article by Kitov and others was published, mathematician Pavel Kuznetsov and philologist Vyacheslav Ivanov have founded a seminar on usage of mathematical methods in linguistics. Between September 56 and December 58, the seminar remarkably contributed to the import of scientific methods into the humanities. A few months after the first meeting devoted to a strict definition of grammatical forms in Russian verse, it was a very exotic topic of the first seminar, the so-called Laboratory of Machine Translation started working at the Moscow State Pedagogical University, or Institute at that time, of Foreign Languages. No wonder that the list of its participants partially intersected with the seminar at the university. The Russian version of Norbert Wiener's Cybernetics, or Control and Communication in the Animal and in the Machine, was published in 58, as we have already seen in Alice's presentation, and 10 years after the MIT original. This book has become an important instrument to spread an idea of interdisciplinary knowledge. In 1958, the Scientific Council of Cybernetic Problems at the Presidium of Academy of Sciences was founded under the former Vice Minister of Defense and Admiral Axel Berg. He was an enthusiast of applied and structural linguistics, promoting the idea of machine translation, first of all, and in its strategic sense. It was he who helped the mathematician Andrei Kolmogorov to organize the first all-union conference on machine translation, and after that, symposium on spectral analysis of speech sounds, both in 1959. That was the way all superstitious structural enterprises have got the strong protection of cybernetics included into strategic plans of the state. Structuralist and semiotic exercises were, if I may, the non-core assets of the serious business. Applied research was a kind of engine for theoretical ideas, and linguistics and closer fields related to language and similar structures in culture. Amidst the stressful conditions of the Soviet scientific milieu, structural linguistics merely felt limited. Since the beginning, Moscow Structural Group has got a publishing platform. It was the non-periodical proceedings entitled Bulletin on Machine Translation and Applied Linguistics have been published since 1957 to 1980 at the Laboratory of Machine Translation in the Institute of Foreign Languages. It was the ideal place for start-up, where the most abstract theories were to be converted into narrow and specific matter. In fact, it was an attempt to go far beyond ideology traditionally associated with the humanities. In 1960, the very notion of machine translation was in favor in the USSR, otherwise it would not be possible to organize for all-union conference in Chernovtsi, Ukraine, with participants from Moscow, Leningrad, Siberian and Caucasian centers. And yet in 1961, the seminar on usage of mathematical methods and literary analysis was held in Gorky, now Nizhny Novgorod. This this strange definition seminar of usage of mathematical methods and literary analysis was to safely replace the structural poetics. The term structural poetics originated from ideas of condemned Russian formalism and Prague linguistic circle, and at last but not least, from American linguistic circles. These conditions prepared the background for organizing the Department of Structural Typology at the Institute of Slavic Studies in Academy of Sciences. The young leader of structural generation of Moscow linguists, Vyacheslav Ivanov, has taken the advantage of the moment. The new group's ambitions were much higher than applied machine translation. They pretended to invent the global theoretical basis literally a kind of omniscience in order to fill the gap of systematical knowledge in the humanities. Some traces of this claim still could be found in the works of the former leaders of structural PAC of the mid-20th century. As for the department at the Institute, it has become an institutional platform for the separate activities. The smart idea of unreliable humanitarians discussed in officially admitted engineers was the following. The structural typology of languages that was to reveal the general principles of compatibility and major algorithms of translation was declared as a main course of new science. But it was realized in texts, first of all in texts of traditional cultures, in folklore genres, myth recordings, and ritual practices. This link allows the department to be affiliated with the Institute of Slavic Studies of Academic Sciences, which regular projects included ethnic and comparative studies in folklore and myth. As a result, Moscow Structural Group, headed by Vyacheslav Ivanov, has got the official workplace. It was not a long time from the time when the Soviet semiotics has emerged, basing on linguistics with its universal modeling competence and bridges between cybernetics and translation, linguistics and anthropology. The Symposium for Structural Studies of Science Systems was held in December '62. It was the first official usage of the term science systems before its appearance on the title of Tartu Moscow series, published since 1964. A collective volume Struктурно-типологические исследования or structural and typological studies was published slightly before the symposium to be discussed within it. The book has met some problems with academic censorship, though structural linguistics was accepted by official science, and a separate series of новой зарубежной лингвистики in use in foreign linguistics was established far back in 1960. The only alternative for the new trend was to print papers domestically, and this poor instrument had been used for inner scientific communication in USSR before the early 90s. This semi-amateur interchange was very highly positioned among researchers who appreciated fair play in science rather than luxurious design of academic editions. As soon as the Moscow structuralism appeared on the map of the Soviet humanities, it has found itself in isolation. Moscow semioticians had strong requirements for reliable publication channel, and it was Yuri Lotman from Tartu in Estonia who came to Moscow first to the Symposium for Structural Studies of Science Systems, and then came for the second time to offer a new project of proceedings to be published in his home institution. There are a few arguments to explain why труды по знаковым системам Science System Studies have launched in Tartu, a small town in Estonia with a high school founded as the Swedish Academy in the 17th century, updated as the German University in the 18th century, and then remained first Estonian independent and then Soviet high school in the 20th century. Many researchers share an idea that Tartu produced an image of almost Europe by contrast of the rest of the USSR. The bilingual and bicultural situation on the margins of the Soviet Empire and the dramatic relations between the invaded Estonians from the one hand and the Soviet Russian-speaking invaders on the other were semiotic in its own and literally demonstrated the process of transcoding. This complicated cultural context in Estonia inspired the idea of cultural polyglottism. Still remain here. Of cultural polyglottism, the key concept of semiotics of culture developed by Yuri Lotman. Being a bearer of Leningrad philological legacy, he was well aware of advantages the town of Tartu had on the symbolical map of the Soviet Union. After the Second World War, Tartu University started looking for an occasion to assert itself among other high schools and to reload its glorious reputation being the Soviet university. This way, Lotman became a link, a personalized link between two parties, the progressive administration of the university and advanced humanitarians from Moscow with their hunger for publications. He never discussed an idea to move back to Leningrad or somewhere else, even if he could get a permission to move abroad in the late USSR. Lotman created the unique position more dangerous to the Soviet regime from the inside. As Yulia Kristeva wrote in her obituary of Lotman, there were, I quote, few unknown scholars, thinkers expressing disturbing ideas in hermetic idioms were regrouping, like a colony of ants to carry out subversive labors. Too complex for the already nascent media culture, their work was of course invisible from Paris or New York, but the masters of the Kremlin were not unaware of its undermining effects. The end of quote. Moscow would provide good opportunities for education and socialization, famous universities, plenty of cultural events, and the richest libraries. The science was traditionally produced in the academia within its specialized institutions. These communities were mere closed, elitist, and oriented to self-reproduction, including the Department of Structural Typology mentioned above. The slow pace of academic publications and their passage to censorship could not promote the requested level of scientific communication, and proceedings of some regional conferences were not regular and had enough place for all worthy papers. There was also a chance to write introduction for the following volumes of Новой зарубежной лингвистики, but this job was extremely rare. Some technologically inclined researchers could address to Axel Berg, who was an editor of non-periodical with the awful title Кибернетика на службу коммунизму, Cybernetics on the Service of Communism. It has been published since 61 to 80 and functioned as a mix of reports that scientists should write for the motherland to confirm that everything is fine and they are happy to serve the state economic strategy. Yuri Lotman was not a member of the Soviet Academy. He approved a model of university science. During his study at the Department of Philology in Leningrad State University, he witnessed the genocide of professorship within the framework of the struggle with cosmopolitanism. And he was born in the family of a Jewish doctor and had no chance to find a job in Leningrad after his graduating from the university. He succeeded to find a position in pedagogical college in a small town situated on the territory that was recently conquered by the Red Army. It was strictly a controversial place. On the one hand, Estonian society was traumatized by the memory of its independence. On the other hand, the memory was actively cured by the new order with its proselytism. The university that became the major sense and ideal of the town in the 19th century reflected both mentioned tendencies brightly. The group of old professors with German and French degrees were still active, but the real administrative power were already concentrated in the hands of new people who preferred to power were already concentrated in the hands of new to use ideology instead of diploma. Later on, these sharp contradictions had become easier, but their principles remained the same. To sum up, Tartu had the following advantages on the map of Soviet humanities. The first of all, living or life tradition of the old-fashioned university. The similar legacy was lost in Moscow and Leningrad yet in the late 30s. Even the Soviet cleaning of the university could not put an end to this tradition at once. The second was cultural multilingualism. It was not important whether Estonian, Russians or Germans spoke Estonian or not. They realized the very presence of the other from the big O. A starting historian, Maida Salopere points out in her book Mapping the Cultural Identity of the Town, the 19th century university successfully refused an official obscurantism and defended the equal rights of Russian and German. Later on, the opposition of empire and national state replaced the opposition of two empires. Anyway, there were always two or more languages and never a monolingual environment. And the third advantage was the so-called double marginality or provincialism. It was the best example of the benefits of the marginal position when it was still back in the 19th century when Gustav Ehrens, who was a rector of the university in the beginning of the 19th century, achieved a double sponsorship, both from the treasury of St. Petersburg and the Livonia province. To be on the border of empire means not only far from authorities and its campaigns, but also close to neighboring plans and cultural change. The Soviet period reinforced this tendency. Tartu was off the Soviet scientific bureaucracy because of its localization in the National Republic with its linguistic and cultural peculiarities. At the same time, it was situated closely enough to Leningrad, 6 hours by railway, and Moscow, 10 hours. A lot of Tartu intellectuals, not only Russian humanitarians, could take a regular night train and spend a weekend or a holiday in Moscow to be active in archives, reading rooms, in academic institutes, to communicate with friends and colleagues. That's why Yuri Lotman was always aware of the news, but quiet life of the cozy town was more appropriate for his studies and meditations. I was planning also to mention the so-called progressive rector of Tartu University, Nádor, who was a mathematician, and he got the permission for bilingual publications, bilingual proceedings from the Soviet authorities, from Moscow. And that's why first the Slavic publications in Slavic studies, in Russian and Slavic studies, was published have been published since 1958. And then on this background, on this fundament, the science system studies was launched in 1964. On this photo, Theodor Clement is pictured in the company of Finnish president and his interpreter. Also I'd like to mention that a few of provincial institutes in the Soviet Union would boast the same infrastructure as Tartu could, because there was a ski center that completed in 1963 that was used as a base, as the basis of so-called summer schools, semiotic conferences, located not in the very town but outside it in the village area. So it was one of the reasons when Roman Carson and other controversial figures of foreign linguistics were invited there and have taken place at these conferences and afterwards at publications in the science system studies. I'd like to, yes, this is, I just suggest a very brief scheme about the evolution of Tartu semiotic proceedings through the 3 decades. It corresponds to the decades, these 3 periods corresponds to the decades. And to sum up, I'd like to stress, to conclude, I'd like to stress that I'd like to ask some kind of rhetorical question. Is it an expected paradox that semiotic journal in Tartu was more liberal than after official liberation? Because nowadays the science system studies is the absolutely normalized for proceedings with lowering glory all over the world, with very local interests and local tasks. As it once happened with French structuralism in the late 60s, a theory needs an object of resistance and decays with no troubles, with no some counter agents. But unlike Telkeli, Tartu proceedings pretended to stay out of ideology as a pure scholarly journal. Now it's clear that during the Soviet period, the ideology was an outer social, ethical, or whatever reason to be a semiotician, to be a scientist in the humanities in the Soviet Union. So, thank you.
Thanks a lot,
say a few words about this link with ethnography. I heard that there was an expedition to the Kete, to Siberia. Yeah, just maybe a few words more about this application of semiotics in ethnography.
Yes, the ethnography because of this link between so the answer would be the following. It was personally Vyacheslav Ivanov who was very interested to link to construct links between ethnography and linguistics. And Vyacheslav Ivanov had very strict and consequent interests in not in ethnography but especially linguistic anthropology. And that's why that branch of Academy of Sciences and the Institute of Slavic Studies was established. And but there were some troubles with official improvement of this direction of research. But traditionally they have made a kind of segment of semiotic study of mythology, because nobody from the authorities could check out and could suggest some alternatives of the meta language, because nobody understood this meta language describing mythology in the semiotic way, in semiotic terms. So my basic point is that with no dependence from the essential way of research, it was the primal task to elaborate the very elitist language of description of the object, whether it will be mythology or literary text, author literary text, visual texts a bit later, or semiotics of even semiotics of waterfalls and semiotics of watches in the latest volumes of these proceedings. The main idea was to elaborate very elitist language to stay far beyond the official mainstream of the Soviet science. And I think that this expedition that you mentioned, it's very interesting that it wasn't, as I remember, it was not a very broad discussion about this expedition in ethnography, in circles of Soviet ethnography. It wasn't a great reflection about it, because the language was very complicated.
Yes, there are comparisons about Kolmogorov and Wiener and their parallel trajectories during the Cold War, let's say, and then you see to what extent ideology or this kind of dialogue with ideology led to the specifics between the West and the East in interpreting society system. But I was wondering for Lotman, how does he enter into dialogue with the French structuralism, or even the German, I don't know, system theory, because if you read his books about cultures, it's like you read Luhmann almost, you know. So how does this relation play? Because if you read Luhmann, it is as if there was not such a context of Soviet ideology, but rather European dialogue.
Yes, the answer is very simple. Lotman learned French. German was his home language in Leningrad, so he was very fond of German traditional historian and works of traditional historians of the first half of the 20th century to be read in German. He learned French during his stay at the war. And that was learned language, not mother tongue, but learned language, learned a bit later, and it was his first love. And so he made his choice to read in French, first of all, French structural linguistics. Ferdinand-Saussure, first of all, by INTERCO-SSH and others. And that was his background to elaborate his semiotic methodology on the early phase. There was no any traces of German influences in Orban's early writings to language. His dialogue was only between. It was not dialogue in between. It was one directed influence from French to Tartar sematicians in the face of Orban.
I'd like to expand Sergei's question on the relation between ethnography and linguistics in Tartu because, well, Tartu was a very specific location for human geography as well, that is called economic geography in those years. There is a very interesting German approach in post-war geography, which was part of the renewal process there, that was social geography of a mini school, Sozialgeografie Münchner Schule. And it was in the 60s, 70s, 80s, somehow tolerated in some countries of the former communist bloc, but it wasn't much like. In an interesting way, in the Soviet Union, there were two universities. Their departments were allowed to deal with this or to focus on this issue, and one of them was in Tartu. I think the other one was in Tbilisi, maybe. And basically the new in this approach was that they tried to focus on microgeography, so everyday practices of people, sociological sort of background was considered here, which is quite related to the use of language, especially in a region like this called the Soviet Socialist Republic, and also to ethnography. So my question is whether you know about any links between this sort of story and, well, this sort of interesting new initiatives in geography in Tartu.
I'm not very informed about it, but I know definitely that after the decline of the USSR, the renewed semiotic department of Tartu University established these links with the Department of Geography, and they even had a series of conferences dealt with both biosemiotics, semiotics of biology, and semiotics of environment, and in this sense, semiotics of geography in both in micro and macro sense. But I cannot speak more about the detailed context of it. But I know definitely that it was after Lotman's impact on his school established by himself. But after his death, the main trend was changed, and the trend is now inclines. The main tendency is to biosemiotics, semiotics of environment, semiotics of geography, including these fields.
Bruno? Yeah, I have two questions. In the 50s, the linguistics were such a problem that Stalin himself wrote or signed at least a famous work on linguistics to oppose the mayor school. And also Voloshinov from the Balkan Circle has written a work on the polemics. My question is how the work of Lotman and relates inside this universe of the most broad linguistic scene in Russia. One question. The other one is how these different variants are related with efforts of diffusion in France, especially by Svetlana Todorov or even Julia Kristeva that translates in the 60s Mikhail Bakhtin, the poem of Dostoevsky's Poetics. So there are any kind of relationship, because I see that in Todorov anthology, all these people appears one after the other. So it's a kind of union of something that is in fact very, very different. So
I think that Todorov's approach is the approach from the outside to the Soviet situation. But the very complicated state of things was that Lotman somehow ignored both Bakhtin, and his followers. And there were no links between Lotman's approaches and Bakhtin. He appreciated Bakhtin as a very significant figure in the humanities. And it was the one volume of Science System Studies devoted personally to Bakhtin's Jubilee. But this article dealt with Bakhtin was written by Vyacheslav Ivanov, and Lotman he almost had no references to Bakhtin in his writings. So it wasn't the united field. They were very separated from each other, and Lotman was especially separated from others. He constructed his personal worldview and some completed world picture, with no references. Maybe to Ferdinand de Saussure, maybe to other classics of the first half of the 20th century, but almost nothing more.
I would also have a question connected to this, but already from the post-history perspective, because it's true that Lotman is not really quoting Bakhtin, but of course Uspensky and people like that.
Yeah.
And my question would be that how do you, I mean, of course there is a lot of literature about this kind of kulturologia, post-history of semiotics, and I wanted to ask you that where do you see the concept or the problem of national culture actually appearing in this context? I mean, do you see it already being part of the classical 1960s discussion, and how does it mutate into something that in the post-89 context will become obviously a kind of replacement for scientific Marxism, and becomes a kind of, let's say, post-socialist national science, actually, or ethno-national science, even a kind of replacement of ideological dogmatism to a new ideological dogmatism. So how do you see the nationalization, inherent potential of nationalization of this discipline, which seems to be universalistic in its?
Yes, I'm not sure that I'm ready to answer in the Russian context, because now Lotman and semiotics and the very department of institutionalized semiotics in Turkey was redefined in the way of Estonian national revival.
Yeah, the Tartu in the Estonian, but the method in the Russian.
Yes, method is Russian, but it was one special person, my former supervisor Petr Torok, who is very active in translating both Bakhtin words into Estonian, in commenting them, and to establish them as a background, as a basics of his personal theory of translation, both translation and interpreting. And this way, I think that this way Bakhtin's theory becomes, so to speak, an Estonian theory. And it was translated and approved. But as for Russian context, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that Bakhtin is now topical for this direction. But perhaps I just not in course.
Okay, if there's no other question, then we now jump not to Estonia but to Lithuania. So I would like to ask Vida Salonian-Kaite to give her paper. She's coming from the Institute of History from the University.
Thank you very much for letting me to speak here, and I would like to stress in my paper the main theoretical approaches which reveals continuities and discontinuities, Lithuanian science, science of anthropology, and the second question, which is very important for me to show the links to the West and East, and which are associated with the main issues which Lithuanian anthropologists and ethnologists deal with. Public expectations was in crisis affected the social science and humanities and even quality of life. I would like to stress the ideas of Cliff Gamble in the Journal of Royal Anthropological Institute. He stressed that names are important. In 2013, the French government's proposal to change the title of this anthropological bachelor degrees from license ethnologie anthropologie to science sociales received an angry backlash. And this fact, as a lot of many facts we can find in the recent volumes of scientific journals, shows that still in academia ideas, the names of these disciplines and the links are quite very actual and important. According to Henrietta Moore and Todd Sanders, at the root of anthropology lies an important question: what is the relation between culture and thought? And recently in anthropological discourses, and there is a lot of new discussions about the capitals times, especially relevant are the interdisciplinary dialogues of the neoliberal and global period with the sociologists. Academia wrote a lot about nostalgia for the approachment of ties between anthropology and history in 1980. So in my paper, I will argue that social science dialogue have to be integrated in their scope. The paper aims to explore how in Lithuania, as in the old Baltic countries, wars and economic crisis impacted the continuity of anthropology. In Lithuania, as well as in whole Eastern and Central Europe, the boundaries between anthropology, ethnology, and ethnography are defined differently, and in my approach that anthropology and ethnology in the history of Lithuanian science has many pointed, is receiving more room. So I slow down and speak now. I will focus on the three such questions in my presentation very shortly because I have quite a long paper. I will focus on the policies of the institutions of anthropology and ethnology and intellectual thought in history. First, as the approaches of epistemology. Second, as the interruptions and non-continuation of the discipline influenced by the Soviet era. And third, the modern features of the internationalization in anthropology and the modern post features of crisis of representation. So, epistemology beyond early Soviet era in ethnography was very, very special and has continuities in all the science. In the pre-Soviet Lithuania, epistemological approach was to know the nation, culture, and the state in some issues as it have continuities. It was such very important journal which it was called INTERCO-SSH, and I'm mentioning it because the issues were discussed at that historical times are even important nowadays, and this is the continuity of ethnology. In 1941, in the early Soviet era, it was a reorganization of this institution, and Institute of Ethnology of Lithuanian Academy of Science was established. But the basis for this establishment was the same journal INTERCO-SSH and the notions of Volkskunde have many links with Polish Ludosznactwo and German Volkskunde. We were closely linked to topography, statistics, and the employment of a population, also home economics and geography, religiosity, festivals, and so on. And as Kashuba stated, German anthropologists, the research in Germany was both ourselves and as well as foreign societies. And in Lithuania we have stressed that the main research was done of their own society, but in any case there were many links in the epistemological approach with the scientists of our Nordic countries, where we have a lot of contacts with Sweden, also a lot of contacts with Polish academia. And also at that time we can see the important deals of actors who financed the environment technology and so on. So the second interesting question, which will show the peculiarities of the links with East and West, is the changes from ethnic to ethno. Rapid changes of concept ethnic are the good indicators of continuities and discontinuities in anthropology. On the one hand, it deals with theory of European ethnology, and on the other, the impact of Soviet ideology-based historical materialism and scientific atheism, and so on. So writing in the Gimtesės kraštas about the feast of such local inhabitants, one Lithuanian ethnographer emphasized that we have in mind here not the feast of all estates, but only the folk and its name in the second half of the 19th century, in these times because we lack resources and so on. So if we compare this notion of ethnic fields, the discourse widely reveals the importance of themes as individualism and belonging, as well as the consequence of cultural contacts developed in anthropology and ethnology until today. Ethnic relations analyzed most widely from the multidisciplinary approach. Well, and then we compare such discourse that was known in Soviet era, the concepts of Sergei Shirokoporov. They have developed also the concepts of Bakhtin, Cheboksarov, which were very, very known in Lithuanian discourses and had a great impact. We should stress that the analysis of the culture was not analysis, was more as a cultural features analysis, but it was derived from the notion, sociological notion, and interest in sociological attitudes. And at that time, we remember that in the West discourses, it was very known the notion of ethnicity of Reisman, and where it was well split, and it was the receipt shows the features of multi-ethnic socialism. And summarizing we should stress that even now in Lithuania, discourses, the discourses of ethnic culture are very important. Of course, there are a lot of analysis which is linked with the Western discourses of MacDonald, Hodgkins, Anthony Smith, and so on. The meanings of term ethnic culture is very split for the practical notions and practical things like this. Speaking about the main impacts of Soviet era, we should stress that Soviet ideology and political system determined essential changes in science, because instead of ethnology was established ethnography, and it was the branch of the history science. So Lithuania, many scholars, intellectuals withdrew to the West from the Soviet regimes. Already known, many scholars from Polish, also other one, and of course it was the great. This was the great changes for the development of science. Also, there was reorganization of museology, and we should say that in museums at that time, particularly in 1945 and 1956, it was much done to establish the Marxist, Leninist, and Bolshevik propaganda of the regime. And the organization had a destructive, destroying nature. Also, we should say that in the social science and humanities, priorities was given to progress and bearing productive wealth of material culture and work traditions. During the Soviet period, the nationalism was manifested in the pursuit of ethnographic research to fixate the unique elements of culture, to maintain one's own identity, and so on. One also very great impact was the works of atlases and the joint atlases of all the worlded regions. The methodology of research was chosen geographical points in which the ethnographic experience was collected, were separated by equal distances. It was the great impact of hermeneutic approach. And this is also was very great impact from Soviet era. And so the establishment for Lithuania in the 10th and 1990s is a time of renaissance and creation of the new ideologies. During 1990s, scholars began to abandon historicism and develop new methodologies. In material culture, research phenomena came to be asserted through people's concepts of view. Research took over new aspects. Interest developed in how people create material products, how aspects of customs and rituals accompany their actions, and what certain signs are very important for Lithuanians. Then we are speaking about this crisis of representation. We should remember that this crisis of representation and fragmentation was common for all the West ideas, and about crisis of representation spoke a lot West theoretics. And special attention was paid in anthropology to the geopolitical aspect of West and the other. Anthropology sought space to define discourse and practice drove connections between the West and other. And so the changes of multicultural societies, this aspect well, disappeared. The other and the self was in the same society. These ideas were crowned by Clifford and Marcus' book Writing Culture and essential the three directions. The three directions in anthropological Occidentalism, it is self-reflection, research, interest of research, of invention of tradition, and also growing contest to a Western ethnography, as stressed Bernard, was very evident in Lithuania. I do not speak so much about the facts, how scientists develop the ideas and so on, but concluding, I'll stress such main three ideas: that crisis impacted the dialects of anthropological theory in history. Different dialects of the social science in time were targeted in their scope. Interruptions of the disciplines of ethnology, that is, the loss of personalities during immigration, repression, and other circumstances, and founded the new institutions, of course, had a great impact. Internationalization, individuality, and codes of tradition, the influence of urban and social cultures, and the harmony of traditions and innovations were made by audit culture, and it erased audit culture, but that did not erase the interest in Ulm's nation and Ulm's culture research. And the third, after the crisis, the concepts of localization, which was one of very important and now are taking quite different approaches, and individual views are becoming important, also losing the community, significance of community is changing, and so it is new forms of conceptualizations. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, and we have some minutes for debate, I think. Discussion.
Please set me maybe, is it category of approach because it is interaction biography connected with German or Central European, Czech cultural heritage and folklore is get some perception.
I can't speak because in Lithuanian works these approaches are not common. Yeah.
No, I talked to my older colleagues in the Institute of Ethnology, and I several times I wondered how when this the Baltic states became part of the USSR, and they came to these republics to make research in the late 40s, early 50s. What were the relations between the local experts and the experts from from Moscow, Leningrad, all the relations between the population they tried to study and the experts from from these new centers of power and knowledge power exit. So
well,
maybe you could say if you want.
Yeah, I can speak about it a bit more. Thank you for the question. It was big atlases, which really there was one known Russian researcher, Vaslova, and the focus of that atlases was the material culture, and they did research of clothing, of agriculture, things like that. And it was the shift to the cultural approach in Lithuania. And the second one, we can we can say that this atlases brought a hermeneutic approach because they did research in the places which were in the same distances one from another, and so they look for the peculiarities of eras and so on. And it was not only in Lithuania, it was also in Latvia. The atlases was the pieces of the work of.
I would like to, it's somewhat outside your topic, but I'd like to know something about the initial phases of the building up of the ethnographic science in Lithuania. So in the interwar years, have there been already a university chair in ethnology? Was there an institute of ethnographic research? And before, what happened before the independence period? Had there been initiatives in this sense?
Yeah, I have it written in paper, but didn't speak yet. It's too long. But then we are remembering the 1945. Before it was ethnography science was established in two universities, Vilnius University and where the experts from a Polish, a lot of Polish tradition, and another one it was in Kaunas, Vytautas Magnus University, which have links more with Volkskunde traditions. And so it was very important that community, the journal research community, which has established the journal I spoke about. And all they together were published the research and also historical research in that journal. And after in the first Soviet era, the Kaunas Magnus cathedral at Kaunas Magnus University was closed. Also, all Polish intelligentsia and academia went out, and it was established that institute on the basis of the journal Gimtasis Kraštas, and the leader Kubiliškis also was the same, and was established as a part of Soviet Science Academy. And mostly foundations were done by this. Before, they have separate agents for the foundations. And in the early Soviet era, the foundation went from the Academy of Science. And so, and it became the branch of historic science, that's ethnography. And when you are looking for the approaches about I told, they have different links also with East and West traditions. And now we have, in 1990s, then Lithuania became independent again. We have the main, we have also Center in the Institute of History, where I am from, and also in Kaunas we have Vytautas Magnus University, a lot of small local centers and so on.
The anthropological field, so to speak, contains similar disciplines such as ethnology, ethnography, folkloristic, social anthropology, maybe culturology, some others in different countries. So how do these disciplines relate to each other in Lithuania? And is there a deep tension between social anthropology oriented towards the Anglo-Saxon discipline and the ethnology?
Well, thank you for that question. It's really the discussion, and from my point of view, officially we have ethnology, and we have PhD in ethnology. But the notion of ethnology covers also cultural anthropology, folkloristics, and more. We have such few social anthropologists, but they only call themselves, they have the centrum, but officially there is no established the degree of social anthropologists. But as the idea of my speech here and the comparison of different cases, it was to show that the notion of anthropology, maybe more of social anthropology, is more closest for Lithuanian discourses. Well, but there are a lot of practical aspects which are connected with ethnic culture, and so they developed also folkloristic notions.
We asked whether there is a reflection in the interwar period or in the post-45 period about the multi-ethnicity of the Lithuanian space. I mean, is there, and what is the proportion? So, I mean, my question is really about continuity and discontinuity between the national romantic and the Stalinist ethnography. So, is there any kind of shift in terms of whether they consider the spaces homogeneous or heterogeneous?
Yeah, I mean, then we are commenting and in such very broad approach. Maybe we were more point to ethnic majorities before the Second World War. And during the Second World War, when they spoke with ethnos, but maybe very quick, the ethnos by Soviet theoretics was compared with the nation. And of course, this approach brought such an eccentric approaches more. And now there are a lot of sociological discourses, and there is a lot of research of Lithuanian ethnic majorities.
But was there, like in the 1950s, 1960s, did they talk about Poles?
About Poles, yes.
Yeah.
In 1960s, about Poles, no. In 1941, 43, and 1960s, maybe you can, but well, my professor also spoke about this and taught us to do comparison, but it was not so evident research of ethnic majorities. It came only after 1990s. Yeah.
Okay, I think thanks a lot, and then we will move now to Romania, to Nádor, to talk about Romanian sociology in the 1960s.
I prepared a very short presentation, and in this morning I reduced this short presentation to be boring. So the background of the orientation of Romanian society in 60s.
Just talk into the microphone because I think nobody will hear you.
For the better understanding of this, my topic, I have started with a short presentation of the past of Romanian society. After the big institutionalization of this science in the first decade of 20th century, chairs of sociology were founded in every Romanian university after the World War I. but only one of the chairs was doing more than just amateur sociology. The chair funded by the Professor Dimitrie Bustiu at the University of Bucharest. Based on his own sociological system, Bustiu built an extra-university organization, the Romanian Social Institute, and initiated a lot of new projects. First of all, field research in Romanian countryside. The so-called sociological monograph started in 1925, were original, collective, multidisciplinary research program which gathered a lot of young specialists and students around the Professor Bustiu. This research program and experience became well known in Europe in the early 70s. After a short period of Ministry of Education of Bustiu, the professor learned a new method and techniques devised for social intervention in the Royal Cultural Foundation, but not neglect the monographic research. This is why the member of the International Sociological Institute accept unanimously at the Paris Congress in 1937 that the next Congress would be organized in Bucharest for the first time in the East European country. It was a great opportunity for this school to prove the originality of its sociological monograph, as well as to show their ability to organize the international conference. For instance, Bustiu invited the participants to send their paper before the beginning of the event and printed them in several volumes, about 8 volumes. As you know, the 40th Sociological Congress was postponed sine die because the outbreak of the Second World War in September 1939. But looking at the accomplishment made during this preparation, Bustiu was right to say the Congress wasn't held anymore, but it was actually in place. After the autumn of 1939, a lot of scholars declared the death of Bustian school, Bustian sociology. In fact, the Bucharest school had adopted another strategy, one of the survivors. Its actual death took place in 1948 as a start of the new regime. Sociology, the discipline disappeared from the university system, being declared bourgeois, unscientific discipline. Sociologists changed their profession, and a lot of them were arrested. Two of Bustiu's forced to leave his home, and his retirement pension was revoked. He survived with support of his former students. So in 60s, was not necessary to rehabilitate, not to introduce sociology, because it had been eliminated from the academic and cultural life. The concept of rehabilitation was used mainly in 60s to rectify a lot of illegal decisions of the early George regime against the individual groups, scientific fields, people, literary movement, etc., etc. In the name of class struggle or bourgeois ideology, so on. I think, and this is my main point, that the acceptance of the accepted data of the rehabilitation of 1965 is a very problematic one. First of all, I consider that the rehabilitation didn't happen in a year, but it was a very long process, started after the death of Stalin in mid-50s. Some former students of Gusti worked in the domain of statistics and economic research, initiate